Today is Friday, April 28th, 2017. My name is Louise Stern, and it's my honor and privilege today to interview Marian Nachman for the Jewish Historical Society of Fairfield County. We're at the Stanford Jewish Center. Good morning, Marian.
Hi, Louise. I'm happy to be here.
Marian, you signed the release.
Yes, I
And
did.
you read it and you understood it.
Right.
Okay. So tell us your name and what people call you.
My name is Marian Nachman. People call me Marian. Nachman is my married name, although I've been divorced a long time. I didn't go back to my maiden name, which is Neuhaus, the German version, Neuhaus. And my first name, Marian, I was born Marianne, because I was born in Holland, and that's the Dutch name. When I came over to this country in 1946, and I got my citizenship papers, I dropped the NE because everyone was calling me Mary Ann. So I became Marian, which I preferred.
Okay. So tell us, where were you born?
I was born in a smallish town in Holland, in the province of Brabant, which, and the name of the town is 's-Hertogenbosch. Bosch is the same as the artist, or anyone who wants to know. He's from there, although none of his artwork is there anymore. It's 's-Hertogenbosch, the woods of the Duke, translated.
Uh-huh. Okay. Now, I would like to ask you all about your early childhood.
Well, most of my early childhood, let's say a lot of it, was told to me because I don't remember it. I don't remember my parents except through photographs, which I feel very fortunate to have. A lot of survivors don't even have that. So putting together different things over the years, I lived in a certain street at a certain address for maybe 3 years. So since I was born in 1938, about 1941 or so on, my parents went into hiding because the Nazis had arrived. I was given, and there's no documentation for a lot of this, but piecing it together, this is what we think happened. That I was given to a business associate of my father's who was not Jewish. He had there were 10 or 11 children in the family, and everyone figured that one more child wouldn't be noticed. The unfortunate thing was that I was the only brown-haired, brown-eyed child. All the others were blonde. And one of the children, apparently a kindergartner at that time, said something in school about a child being there. I mean, a kindergartner, So then the father was concerned, worried about my welfare, and after a few months, I was sent to the next province over, which is Limburg, and that borders Germany. And they speak a dialect there which is similar to German. Excuse me. Right, thank you. And these, Christina Martens, who was my mother, my Underdog Mutter, which means protective mothers, was related to that family. But basically they had no connection to me. They weren't related to me, and they sacrificed, they risked their lives to take me in. So that's where I lived for the rest of the war. I can go off in a lot of different directions here. What life was like there.
Tell us about your family life there.
Well, I had a wonderful mother and father, and there were 2 boys in the family. It was probably the nicest house in town. We had fruit trees, we had bushes, vegetable garden, a rabbit, pig. So we had food, unlike people in Amsterdam where there was starvation, so I was very lucky. And the way they introduced me there in this town, which was at that time entirely Catholic, now it's very multicultural, multiracial, everything. Well, like I say in my story, the priest knew. And I think the reason the priest knew, somebody had to know in order to help shield my real identity. But nobody else really knew, supposedly. And after a while, I mean, I was brainwashed at first, because, you know, by the time you're 3 or 4, you know your last name. But they said, no, your name is not Mariana Neuhaus, it's Mariana Martens, which was their last name. So, you know, after a while, I believed it. And that's what I grew up doing. I was raised Catholic. I went to the local convent school, and according to my Dutch brother, one of them is still living, and I'm in touch with him and his wife and his children and his grandchildren. And last year, just to interject, not last year, 2015 November, my family all went over there, and part of our trip was for them to meet the family. So this was really one of the most wonderful experiences for me, to have their grandchildren. Yes. So life there was, you know, even though there was a war and there was rationing, for a young child, it wasn't frightening, because I think they did everything possible to shelter us from fear. Although one of the most frightening experiences I personally had was that it was my duty every morning to go to the bakery, which was owned by one of the relatives of Martins, to pick up the fresh bread. And it was early, and I was on my scooter, and a truck of soldiers pulled up, and, you know, they were pointing at me, and I was terrified. I hid behind a lamppost that I knew wasn't protecting me, and then finally they decided to take off. But that was very scary. And other things which probably frightened my parents more was that at some point during the war, German soldiers were in the town, and they used our house as headquarters. So you can imagine how that was for them, but for me as a child, you know, and at one point they like to point out later, and they stayed in touch with that sergeant through his re-education. There's correspondence back and forth, that, you know, he was bouncing me on his knee at one point. So they must have been terrified.
So it was sort of a familial kind of a relationship. It wasn't
well,
a
he
hostile
was
one.
a quote-unquote good German.
Uh-huh.
He, whether out of gratitude, I don't know, but he warned the family that there would be a bombing, so that we all went to the basement, the bomb shelter, and that was, I guess, the strongest cellar in town. And when I went back to visit, it looked so tiny. I couldn't imagine dozens of people sleeping there. But I thought it was all a lot of fun, you know? That's my memory of that. Bombs did fall nearby, and the cathedral was totally demolished, and there was a gigantic hole where a bomb had fallen. So it was close.
You must have felt very secure if you weren't frightened.
Well, I think what they did, whatever it was or said, you know. But I've heard of other children who, like someone who went on the kinder transport with his older brother, he thought it was all a big adventure. You know, if the children, if they're given some support, you know, then they aren't terrified. Not to say that you aren't capable of being frightened. So, I remember understanding the German soldiers. We were told not to talk to them at all, not to communicate, which we didn't. But I was surprised. I understood them. Again, because the dialect was similar to the German language. Which
So-
probably explains why I learned German so quickly when I came to this country at the age of 8 in 1946. I was one of the first children to come over after the war.
Uh-huh. When you were living with them, what kind of holidays did they, what holidays?
Christmas, my favorite holiday.
okay.
Oh, yes. In fact, I missed it when I came here and I was told I was Jewish. I had no idea what that was. And it's a good thing. I mean, they had to protect me and themselves. And so I didn't have any Jewish education, so to speak.
Did you have any favorite foods that were associated
Oh,
with
yes,
the
the
holidays?
Dutch, yes. And I still like occasionally to go to the Dutch store in Norwalk where they sell Dutch treats.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
And what about life cycle events? How did you celebrate birthdays?
During the war, I don't know.
Nothing.
I don't remember much.
Uh-huh.
I do remember that, it's traditional for a Catholic child to have a first communion at about the age of 8. And this was already after the war, after VE Day, which was
Mhm.
1945 in May in Holland. And I have a picture of myself, which I didn't bring, of myself in a dress, communion dress, but I wasn't allowed to have a first communion. And that was one of the saddest days of my childhood, because I didn't understand. I was supposedly the best student. I knew my catechism better than anybody, so, why not? But, the Catholic Church, they couldn't do that.
That's
Because
interesting.
they knew I was Jewish. Now, there were many cases, again, not me personally, where children were
Mhm.
baptized and so on. So I really, I owe the Martins so much gratitude in so many areas, including that they didn't try to baptize me.
Mhm. And then you had to leave the Martins,
Yes.
and that was very traumatic, I know.
Well, it was, and yet, it took me many years to think about the fact of how it affected me, because I had the aunt and uncle who adopted me. They had plenty of trauma getting out of Germany, It was very close. They were late in leaving, and they never saw their family again, and so on. So my aunt and uncle were difficult people, let's say. And my father was a doctor, and yet there was, in those days, very little understanding of the psychology of how children would be affected. Post-traumatic, that didn't exist until after Vietnam. So nobody thought that maybe this child needs a little help.
What did
And
you
the
call
worst,
them? What did you
well,
call them?
that was another thing, It was very clear to me that my aunt wanted me to call her mother, but that was very difficult for me. And then on the other hand, again, I didn't know this till much later, benefit of many years of therapy, finally, as an adult, that I was angry with the Martins. Why would they let me go? I didn't understand. So I couldn't call her mother anymore either. So there were a lot of issues of identity and so on, but that's all benefit of hindsight and therapy.
So you lived with them,
Mm-hmm.
and I think their names were Ellen and Fritz, if I'm not
Oh, yes,
mistaken.
that, over here,
Yeah.
yes,
So
right.
how shall I refer to them, as Ellen and Fritz?
That's fine,
Okay.
yes.
So you came to New York and you were living with them. And what kind of a household was that? Were there siblings?
Yes, they had one son who was already 16 and a half. And he'd been an only child his entire life, I didn't see that either until much later. Here comes this, he gets a sister. And I arrived in July. So Ellen and Fritz's idea of the best way to handle all this was to send him away so they could focus on me. There was not much understanding, Of course, looking back on it, that wasn't the best way to do it. But anyway, There was tension between Ellen and Fritz, and I became aware of it. And I've always been very sensitive to this, I think, just because of my life, in any situation. Hypersensitive, maybe. But I remember when they picked me up at the airport at LaGuardia, they were arguing. And I understood, they were speaking German, they didn't speak Dutch, which is probably one of the more traumatic events of my arrival, is that I spoke only Dutch.
But you could communicate with them?
No,
Oh,
I could not. They didn't know any Dutch, and they spoke English, and I didn't know any English yet. So, but I could understand some of what they said, again, because of the dialect. So July, and then in September I went into 3rd grade. I had to repeat it, I'd done it in Holland, because I hadn't learned script.
well, you
They
also
don't
didn't
teach
know
any-
English.
And I didn't know English, yes. But to me, that was the more important thing. I learned English very quickly, without benefit of English as a second language classes. They didn't exist in those days. I just learned it fast, and interestingly, I've always been interested in languages. I majored in French in college. I picked up German too, of course. Forgot all my Dutch. So now when I communicate with my Dutch brother and sister-in-law, he remembers some English from school, and she speaks German, and somehow we have no problem communicating.
You don't remember the Dutch anymore?
No, I do not. And
Yeah.
people always say, oh, when you go back there, you'll pick it up again. It doesn't happen.
It probably would if you stayed long enough.
Well, that's what,
Yeah.
I don't know,
Yeah. But what,
maybe.
what
yeah.
kind of a household was it? Was it religious? Were they observant?
Well, we went to church every Sunday.
No, I'm talking about New York.
Oh, New York, sorry. Well, okay, my father came from an Orthodox background, from a small town in Germany. But I think that he went to services every Friday. My mother did not go. She came from a more worldly background from Berlin.
Mhm.
And she did not observe. I mean, she made dinner for Friday night, Shabbat. We always had a challah, and we observed the holidays, but usually we went to a cousin, also from an Orthodox background, who lived nearby for the major holidays.
Mhm.
So when I got married, it was at the synagogue where my father went, Fritz. And I had been sent to Sunday school.
Oh, you were.
Yes, I mean, I went on my own and I came home, and, you know, they had nothing to do with it. It was just, they sent me, and so, you know, especially because I had, I guess, warmer and fuzzier feelings about my Catholicism, that I missed it a long time. When I got married, the first thing, oh, finally I can have a Christmas tree.
And you did.
And I did.
Uh-huh.
My husband didn't mind, the children thought it was fine, but then at one point when my children were like maybe 4 or 5 and 7, I don't remember the exact time, but my son was on the phone with his grandfather, my husband's father, and he turned around to me and he said, "What's Jewish?" And then I had, you know, the proverbial lightning bolt hit me, and I said, wow, this, you know, I have to do, in honor of my parents and everything, I have to do something about this. So we joined the temple.
Now, where were you at this point? In
Well,
Greenwich or New York?
the telephone conversation, we were already in Greenwich.
Uh-huh.
So we lived in New York when we first married in Greenwich Village. That was lovely. And then moved out to Great Neck to a garden apartment. And then we started looking within an hour's commute of New York City,
Mhm.
and ended up in Greenwich.
Okay. I want to get back to that, but I just want to ask you one question.
Sure.
Were you bat mitzvah?
No,
Okay.
my children were.
Okay. And what about Greenwich? What was it like when you moved there?
Well-
What was the year?
That was in 1967. So, my my son was born in '65, so he was little, and my daughter Juliet, was born about a year and a half later, so they were close in age. So she was a baby when we moved here, and I didn't know anyone. In fact, people had said to us, "Are you sure you want to move to Greenwich? You know, there's a lot of anti-Semitism and so on." And we had a realtor who said to us, "I'm sorry, certain places I can't show you." So that was in 1966.
That was in 1960s. In the
67.
1960s. Yeah,
Yes, that's right.
late,
Mhm.
late. So, I didn't ask you this, but when you lived with Ellen and Fritz, were they politically involved with things, or was there political discussions that went on?
Well, I mean, their concerns were just with making a living, and my father, well, they'd been here during the war, so he had been a physician, with a very lucrative practice in Berlin. In fact, he claims that although my father was a gynecologist, for some reason at some point he saw the man who became the Pope. So that was I don't have any details on that. It could be one of these apocryphal things. I should ask my brother if he knows any details. But anyway, they had a hard time at first. When they first came, there were already some refugees that they knew here. Washington Heights was a big area for German Jewish refugees. And he had to pass his medical boards here. I mean, this is all hearsay. This is not what I experienced. By the time I came, they were doing all right. He had many patients. Once he had to learn English too, because he knew Latin and Greek and German, but not English. So I thought it was kind of interesting. He learned his English. He was self-taught through Reader's Digest by reading that. Yeah. So they were already pretty comfortable by the time I got here.
Okay. So how did you and your husband meet, and what made Greenwich appealing to you that you decided to
Because
move
of
there?
all, I'll go answer that last part first. Of all the communities we looked at, the driving to Greenwich in those days was the easiest, the least traffic compared to Long Island or New Jersey. That's where we looked. So now I've forgotten the first part already. Would you repeat it, please? Sorry.
How you and your husband met?
Oh, we met. Through a mutual friend. His family had also been German Jewish refugees, but they'd been fortunate and they had been able to bring a lot of their possessions over. And they lived in Kew Gardens. I never knew my husband's mother because she had passed away. She had of a brain tumor many years before. We met at the United Nations. That was one of my jobs after college. And he used to go there to play bridge with the guides.
At the United Nations?
Yes. Well, the daughter of other German refugee friends of ours had become a guide, as I eventually did too, for a brief period of time at the UN. So that's...
But that brings up, so you worked at the UN.
That was many jobs I've had.
So let's hear a little bit, first of all, about your education.
Okay.
And
well, I went to...
whether you went to college and where.
Okay. I started public school in the 3rd grade when I arrived here, and in 6th grade my mother decided that maybe I should go to a local private girls' school called Barnard School for Girls. It doesn't exist anymore. It's a walking distance from home. So I went there through high school. It was a very small school. And I was a good student. I always liked school. And then I went to Smith College for 4 years, and I did my junior year in France and learned French.
You majored in French.
I majored in French. I also took German. And it's one of these things where I spoke very well, I had a good accent in German, but the German professor just gave me F's and G's. He couldn't give me, because I couldn't write it, I couldn't write it. And if you just learn a language speaking it, you don't know the grammar, as a young person, as a child, you don't. Which is one of the reasons that I forgot my Dutch, was that people tell me this, who are experts in language development, that if the language isn't established with school, with writing and grammar and reading, if it isn't established enough, then it's easy to learn but easy to forget.
Interesting.
So I became an ESL teacher, ironically.
You did what?
I became an ESL teacher.
Ah, okay.
So I've always been interested, I guess, because of my background, my sympathies for foreigners, for people who don't speak the language, who are immigrants, et cetera, et cetera.
And that was in the Greenwich school system that you did this?
It was in different places, yes. I got a certificate to teach adult ESL. I substituted a lot in the Greenwich school system, preferred high school, and I substituted preferably, in the French classes, the German classes, ESL classes, but occasionally math too, which I knew nothing about and still don't.
And you could handle it all.
Yes, you figure out how to find the smartest kids in the class, and they will take over.
And what kind of community involvement have you had through the years in Greenwich?
Oh gosh. I've done many different things. I guess when the children were little, I was involved with school for them, as one usually is. And
They went to the public schools?
No, they went to they went to nursery school, which barely existed in those days. It was like I was not considered a good mother necessarily, because I wanted my children to go to nursery school. It sounds like the dark ages now, I know. And my son had some learning difficulties. He had what's now called ADD and whatever, but that also didn't exist then. He couldn't learn script. He was a lefty, like I am. But I was taught to write with my right hand because that wasn't acceptable in Holland in those days. Now it is there too. It's fine. So he learned how to type, and we sent both children to have them at the same school, to private school, the Mead School, which was then starting. And that was an ungraded, it was quite new in those days, yeah. So they thrived there. But then after 6th grade, they went to public schools.
Mm-hmm. So they graduated?
From Greenwich High School, yes.
Both of them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and when you did the substitute teaching and you were involved in their schools, were you involved in any other?
I'm trying to remember. It seems, well, I got divorced in 1976, so at that point I started taking part-time jobs in different areas.
And what were some?
They were all jobs. Some of them, I worked for an architect. It was a small office, and I did all kinds of work for him. I was still married, and I decided I wanted to work part-time, and I went to New York City, and I worked in an art gallery. It was a fellow Smithy who was working there then, and she hired me. I'm trying to remember, Armand Hammer Gallery.
Mm-hmm.
It was very interesting work. It involved translation. It involved all different kinds of things related to
So
art.
you seem to be sort of going toward the arts. Do they still?
I've always been interested in art.
Okay,
Yes.
so they still play an
Ever since I
important-
took Art 1-1 in college, I nearly failed, but I liked art always.
I find that hard to believe. So tell me something, as you were in this country, growing up, going to school, moving to Greenwich, did you experience any anti-Semitism?
Not that I was aware of, no. Mm-mm. Well, we lived in a community, in Washington Heights, where everybody was like me, which was, so it wasn't until I came to Greenwich and the realtor said, can't show you certain areas. That was probably the first, maybe almost the only time that I experienced it. No,
Can you remember what those areas were?
no,
Okay.
sorry. Around the country club, I just don't know.
Yeah.
But I mean, she made us realize that there was latent anti-Semitism.
Uh, It's sort of a funny question, but did being Jewish help you in any way?
Well, I did see that question. I puzzled over it because with my background, I can't see it, and I have to go back here. How was I found? How did anyone know in my family where I was? And that's in the story here. Apparently, I had an uncle. Well, first of all, my father was one of 4 brothers, no sisters. One of the brothers, apparently according to an uncle, the uncle who found me, whose name was Kurt, was the most brilliant, but he had a nervous breakdown, and we know what happened to people suffering with mental health with the Nazis, so he perished. Then there was my father, and then there was my uncle that I went to live with, and then there was another brother, who I just mentioned, Kurt. He came over here a few years earlier and went into the American Army, into intelligence, and he, of course, spoke German, so that was used. And he got leave at some point, and I have letters to that effect, get permission to find me, a mission of mercy or whatever it was called. Now, Ellen had a brother also named Kurt, who was in Europe. He obviously was Jewish, but he was married to a Christian woman, so he was protected. They lived in Amsterdam. So the 2 Kurts, plus the Red Cross, were able to track me down. And I remember my uncle showing up. I didn't know who he was at the time. He showed up at the Martins in uniform. And I apparently immediately felt something toward him. I think it's because he must have resembled my father physically. Excuse me. And I felt friendly toward him immediately, went to sit on his lap, no problem. That's what they made children do in those days. Your relatives go sit on their lap. And he made the arrangements for me to come over here.
So when you had children yourself, did your early childhood experience
Of course,
sort of,
of course.
in what
yes.
kinds of ways?
Yeah, well, again, this is benefit of therapy and so on. I was always worried, frightened. Although it would go from one extreme to the other. I would also let them go, I still live in the same house near the Pinetum in Greenwich. And this is acres and acres of land, and they could go off on their own there. So I let them be independent. I thought this was important. But I think probably it's better to ask them. I don't know in all the ways, but I can't imagine how it wouldn't have affected psychologically, their upbringing. Yeah.
Right. And what other wars?
Sorry, whatever what?
The other wars that you lived through, how did they affect your life?
Well, I mean, even today, I'm it's sort of even though I have experienced a lot and seen a lot, and I'm sure I'm not the only one here, this constant unease about what's going on, and the saber rattling, as I call it, with North Korea. So I've always had that every time there's a war, although I feel kind of distant. And when I first came over here, I was really worried because, we had these atomic bomb drills in schools. And, that was, I certainly remembered that, having to get under the desk and so on, and being frightened. And I remember, I must have been, 10 or 11, maybe you can confirm that, when we had these air raid sirens going in the city, just for practice, and that always made me uneasy. And I wrote a letter to the city about them, you know. I don't remember what I said. I thought, oh, that's
When
an
you
odd
were-
thing for an
when
11
you
or
were a
12-year-old
youngster,
to
you
do.
wrote?
Yes, yes. But yeah, there's always this sort of unease.
Mhm. Okay, now what do you do with your spare time?
Oh, well, since I've gotten older, everything takes me longer, and that's nothing new to anybody at this age. But what I've been enjoying most during the last years is being involved with the local branch of my library, the Coscott Library. It's close to my house. I go there often. I was on the board for 4 years, and even now I'm still on the program committee. It's just a really wonderful bunch of people, very nice. And I joke with them, it's sort of my home away from home. When the power goes out, I go there because they get power faster than where I live.
Yeah.
And only parts of my house are air conditioned, so in summer I go there, the cooling center. I tease them.
Do you do volunteer work there? Or?
Yes, yes.
Uh-huh.
No, paid work, I stopped doing quite a while ago. Oh, I worked at the Whitney as far as art goes. Remember, some of you may remember the Whitney Museum in Stamford. Yes, I started out as a volunteer and then I was on the staff. I worked for Patsy Whitman in her home gallery. If any of you knew her, she apparently passed away. Roxbury Road, she had a beautiful house, and in her house was an art gallery.
And what inventions have you lived to see, and which
Oh
are
my
the
gosh.
ones that you think are the most amazing?
I don't know, the dishwasher.
Great.
I'm rather focused on domesticity. Well, I mean, it's just what's going on, you know, the
Okay.
communications, coping and trying to cope with everything today, from the cell phone to the computer. They're all amazing
But you
things.
do cope with all of those.
To a certain degree,
Uh-huh.
you know.
Yeah,
I try. Sometimes I'm overwhelmed, but I don't think these are unique to me.
yeah. I don't think so
No.
either. And what kind of advice do you have for future generations?
Oh, you know what I left out when you say how do I spend my time is the Child Survivor Group of Connecticut. I've been involved with them since they were formed, which was in 1990 something, I think, when they had the first international survivor conference in New York. I went to that, and then someone formed one in Connecticut, and I've been involved with them ever
So
since.
tell us more about that. What is the work that they do?
Well, we're fewer and fewer in number, but we have speakers. I think that's probably the most important work that the group does, who go to the schools. Judy Altman in particular is an amazing woman who has spoken, I don't know to how many thousands of people during her years. And I've been secretary, treasurer, you know, we had bigger membership. But now, you know, we have occasional meetings. We're having one very soon in Westport, a speaker on anti-Semitism. Weissman, I think is his name. He's quite well known in his field. But originally, when we first formed, it was an outlet for many of us to tell our stories, which we'd never had before. An opportunity to speak to others like ourselves, you know. So we formed it was a wonderful, wonderful thing, and I think probably more than anything else, it helped me process, quote unquote, my experiences.
One of the things that you mentioned to me was the stepping stones that you were
Oh,
going
the
to be involved with.
Stolpersteine,
Yeah.
yes. I don't know, I find a lot of people who don't know what they are. I'm happy to talk a little bit about them. Stolpersteine it's more, not stepping stones, it's stumbling stones.
Oh,
So it was started by a German artist named Gustav Demnig. in the 90s. And what it is for the Jews who perished, small individual plaques are made, not for families, but for each individual. And they are placed in front of where they used to live, if permission is given by the current residents. And I went back to Germany with my, family. Again, it was part of the same trip that I made to Holland. It's a little complicated to explain, but my daughter, my son-in-law, grandchildren, and my brother and his family, most of it, although my sister-in-law passed away several years ago, we all went to a town called Herleshausen in Germany. And it's sort of ironic, but there are no Jews have lived there since the 1930s. There's a Jewish cemetery outside of town. I went to visit that. But with the help, there's a wonderfully active Arbeits. It's sort of a workers group of Christians. I can't think of the name now. The Christian group that is helping Jews, because when Jews return, the Messiah can come sooner. Does anybody know? Okay. Anyway, they're evangelists, many among them. So they are thoroughly researching every single Jewish person who ever lived there. And they put in these Stolpersteine from my parents, as well as other in the family who perished or had to leave, forced to leave. And my uncle got special honors because he saved the town. When he was in the army and they went through there, he left orders that the town should not be destroyed, and it wasn't.
That was your Uncle Kurt?
Yes, that was my Uncle Kurt. So he's a hero there. I can talk about some of the odd but also wonderful experiences there. I mean, I was grateful on one hand, but on the other hand, it was also mixed, very mixed feelings. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what about the book? You brought it, and tell
This
us
book?
about
Yeah.
that. And I think you also brought some photographs that maybe
I
you'll
did.
share with us later.
Okay.
Okay, but tell us about the book first.
Oh, the book, this is a collection of stories put together by Hilda Sharaga, who lived in Stanford. And it was edited by Martin Glassner, whose wife is still living. She was a survivor, but he was not, but he was an editor. And the Child Survivor Group of Connecticut put this together. It's dedicated to Hilda's memory, because by the time it was finished, she had passed away. So this came out in 2006, and I've learned a lot since then. Not everything I wrote is completely accurate even. So, this is one of the things I've learned. If you're going to ask me what I learned,
Mm-hmm.
it isn't over. And now, only recently, I've started being in touch with people in the town where my mother and father lived and where I was born. This is ongoing.
That's in Holland now.
That's in Holland. Yes, because that's where they met and married. That's where I was born. And they're talking and they're getting together now to play Stolpersteine from my parents. So this may happen next May, and if I'm well, I'll probably go over there for that. But information also, a lot of documents weren't made available until not that long ago. So, I wrote in this story that I didn't understand. For example, I figured my parents went to Holland. Why would they go to Holland in 1935 or 36? Nothing was going on yet. Wrong. The Nazis were already, so they had the foresight maybe to leave and also to see different places. On my mother's side, she went to work for and then this is in here, relatives who were Dutch and who owned the biggest department store in Holland where the Queen went to shop. That recently it was sold to H&M store. It's, so I learned, there was a lot going on already, and my parents, perhaps did leave, but I don't have documentation. Now, another thing is coming out of the closet, literally, in the sense that when I went to visit my Dutch family, at one point, parents had already died, and the house that we all grew up in as children was given to the son. The son and his wife and children moved in there, and they completely modernized it. Before they left, they emptied the attic. In the attic they found, it's like a story, a package, brown paper, I have it so I know it's real, wrapped with twine, and in it are dozens and dozens of letters in German, in a German script that I cannot read, and that very few people can read. In fact, I'm looking for someone who can help me, but I've had this package for years. So I just couldn't deal with it, I unwrapped it, looked at it, a couple of things, wrapped it up again, put it back in the closet. And then when this German thing came up, I looked for things that maybe would be useful for the German researcher. And now, I don't know what really started it. I guess the whole Stolperstein. I said, well, my parents should have something, where they lived. And I looked it up, because sometimes other people do it, but no, there was nothing for them. So that's when I decided to start working on it. And so these letters have come out of the closet again. They're unwrapped, they're lying on the couch, and they are staying out. So now I'm dealing with trying to find someone, like I said, who could translate them for me.
It obviously you need somebody who's more than just German.
Oh,
it's a
yes, I
special
need a
kind of
scholar
German.
or an academic
Uh-huh.
or a professor.
Right.
Okay.
It's,
But it's more like, wow, this I'm going to be 80 next year. This isn't, it's about time. There isn't that much time left to do
Yeah.
these things.
Well,
And I realized that I really want to get them done.
well, what you've done is absolutely amazing. And your story, we're just so grateful that you shared it with
Oh,
us.
thank you
It was
for
a
listening.
Wonderful
You see, this
story.
is one, since I can't go out and speak to hundreds or thousands of people, I'm thinking this is my way. I'm more comfortable speaking with people that I know. And I'll do that as much as I can, in every opportunity.
Okay. Did we leave anything out that you want to add?
No?
Did you have some photographs you wanted to share?
Well, yeah, I don't know. First of all, on the back here, in case, this is me,
Mhm.
and these were my two brothers. Yes, everyone had a big bow in those days. And this brother unfortunately passed away. He had kidney problems.
Mhm.
My mother was not actually their mother.
Oh,
This was
really?
his second wife. I didn't know any of these things.
Oh.
They weren't important, in those days, because she had drunk water that had arsenic in it.
What?
So arsenic,
Really?
yes, that was one of the hazards in those days. So he was born with malfunctioning kidneys and lived into his 40s. That's all. But he and I are still in touch.
It's amazing.
And the
what you
family.
found. What were some of the things in the envelope? You said you took them out and you put them back with.
No,
besides
this
the
is a
letters?
mixture of things. I'm afraid I realize how disorganized all this stuff is, and now I have to work on getting it organized. For instance, this was in the package. This is my grandfather came to live with us in Sertogenbosch. He left Germany, and you'll see that there's the Hakenkreuz, the German,
The eagle.
the eagle and the, what, sorry, I'm at a loss for word.
Okay,
I can open it and show you the inside too.
okay, open it up.
Okay. The swastika. Yes, that's the word. So you see that his name is Joseph Israel Neuhaus. That was not, he did not have that as a middle name, but that's what was given to Jews.
Huh?
Now I'm drawing a blank on, oops, sorry, what they call women. Miriam? I'm not sure. Rebecca? I feel stupid because I certainly know it, but I can't think of it right now. That's how they identified Jews. And here, you know, Gestalt, what your shape of your face, yeah, there's more of them. The eagle
Yeah, I've
and
seen
the
it.
Hakenkreuz. Yeah.
And the J means Jew,
Yeah, where do you see J?
the front.
Probably. But his first name was Joseph, but I doubt that would have anything to do with that. Yeah, of course, you know, I'm glad. You see, you need other people. You can't do this by yourself. He came by himself and very late. He didn't survive very long. He died of natural causes, but you know, when you're in your 70s and all this is going on around you, I'm sure that hastened his death. So I do have a picture of his headstone and everything. So this is a picture of my Dutch. It was her favorite picture. I don't know whether I should show you this one because this shows them with the medal that they got for being righteous
Righteous.
Christians, Gentiles, yes. And they went
Now-
to Israel.
Did you institute that?
I wasn't the one, no. There was another woman living with us in hiding who was older than I. And she was old enough to know that she was Jewish. She was the maid in the house to the Nazis. So that was not easy for her, as you can imagine. And she came to see me when I first came to the United States, and my mother didn't allow her to see me. Yes, it sounds strange, but the thinking was that I would get too upset instead of feeling a connection, you know, or she felt threatened. She also wanted me to see her as her own mother, so finally, and not that many years ago, she's since passed away, I went to visit her in Cincinnati, and she was so moved, and so was I. But you know, it took many, many, many years.
How did you keep track of her?
I had her address somehow. I don't know. Can't answer that. It's a good question. I don't know the answer.
Yeah.
Yeah. I combined it with a trip to one of the annual child survivor international meetings, which was in Detroit that year. And last year, I went to the one, it was in November, it was in California. I don't go to every one. Some people go to every single one. And that was sort of a family reunion because, you know, part of my family, I have a first cousin, was born in Holland also, the similar story to mine. He survived because he was blue-eyed and blonde. And he was adopted, he was taken in by a Christian family, but they didn't want to let him go. This is on my mother's side of cousins. So an uncle who lived in South Africa at the time, he had moved to South Africa, married there, and had 3 girls there. He went to court and got him. And anyway, we've been very close, as you can imagine. He's a few years younger than I. And he first didn't want to say, you know, I don't remember anything. I was just an infant. I'm not a survivor. Well, long story short, when he retired, he's now involved as a docent, full-time in retirement, devoted to
And
Holocaust
where is that?
education. He's in Los Angeles.
Oh.
So that's where the meeting was, and three sisters came, and my daughter came, which was wonderful.
That must have been.
And the daughter,
Yeah.
plus the ones from South Africa have moved to, it's all very involved, moved to Toronto. So she came, so they got to meet. But, you know, this is the results of Hitler all over Israel, Chile. They've all died for the most part. So it's sort of, I was amused. They're asking me in Holland now for the Stolpersteiner, they want information, you know, who are all your relatives? We want to get information. I said, this was too long ago, you know, there's nobody left, and who knows?
It
So
shows
it's
how
whatever-
important it is to do it.
Well, to document, yes. And in today's climate where people just take pictures, including myself, on their iPhones, and they don't write letters. I mean, I have these letters from my parents, you know, don't have that. So it's all the more important to document as much as you can.
You've done an amazing job of searching out those documents.
Well,
Finding
they've
what you
been
did.
there. Yeah. Well, it's important for me to get things right now that I'm doing it. As right as possible, anyway.
So this package that you got was something that came with you, obviously, from your parents.
Well, we don't know because the Dutch parents never talked about it.
Oh.
You know, it was discovered by accident when my Dutch brother and his wife were cleaning out the attic. They found this.
Amazing.
And they brought it. They came to the States once and they brought it along.
It's amazing.
I know, I'm lucky that I
Yeah.
have it. So it's hard to explain, you know, what was put together here and what did they put together. Because there's also furniture in the Martins' house. So how did that, you know, did Albert Martins, my father, he must have known something and was able to rescue some of the furniture, which the Martins are keeping, that belonged to my parents. They always asked me, do you want it? I said, no, you know, you can keep it. They love it. It's interesting for me to see. I've taken pictures of it, but it's so big and heavy. It's not like, you know, but...
How did they get it?
Well, I know, that will remain unexplained. I don't see. I think that maybe, you know, the Nazis just took over. In Holland, they didn't have what's called Wiedergutmachen, where you get paid for property by the Germans. They've been, in a manner, very generous, which many people will disagree with because they couldn't possibly pay for it. This was the house I lived in Horst, in Limburg, in Holland. This was my father, whom I don't remember, but I have, like I said at the beginning, I'm lucky to have pictures of him. This is me as a baby in Holland. I'll do them in chronological order. This is me, I guess, as a young child, still with my own family in Holland. And this is me the first summer I came over here in Fort Tryon Park in
Did you
Washington
ever go to
Heights.
summer camp?
Yes, I did. And this is my American parents, no, here and here, and the Martins, when the one time they met in Holland, and the two boys at that time.
Marian, in the book, isn't there a picture of you with the...
Yes, there's several pictures of me in
Isn't
there.
there one with the communion dress on?
Could be, yes. I think you're right. I haven't looked in a while. Sorry about that. Do you want me to open the book and show it? All right, I have to find the page. Excuse me a moment. 75. Yeah.
Okay. You have a description?
Yeah, this is me with my two Dutch brothers. So, 1942, and this is shortly before I left for the States in front of the house because I'm already wearing a dress that Ellen and Fritz sent over for me. Okay, so there's a picture of me with my father, 1941. I was probably 3. I'm dressed for my first communion, but I led the parade and I carried flowers, but I couldn't participate in the religious part. And that's Jan, the younger brother. Actually, I think he was the older brother, but he didn't develop, didn't grow normally. And I think that's all the pictures. That's me with my daughter at her wedding in Spokane in 2001.
I don't understand.
It was in August, so the month before 9/11.
Marian, we thank you so much for sharing all of this with us, and bringing you all so that we can have a record of it. And it's very precious, and we're very
It was a
grateful.
pleasure for me a pleasure, it's difficult to do, but I'm glad to have had the opportunity that you were willing and able and made it possible for me to share with more people. Thank you.
Thank you.